The negotiations on this bill started last year, and a number of themes were identified which were guiding the discussions at NEDLAC. And so far, the negotiations on the 4 themes have been completed, and these themes include atypical employment, dispute resolution, collective bargaining, compliance, and enforcement. So the social partners have negotiated these 4 themes, and the NEDLAC report is been compiled or is been finalized on these 4 themes. And the discussions or the negotiations on the 2 other themes will have to kickstart.
All right. On which 2 other things?
Employment services and employment equity.
Employment services, is that also what is referred to as labor brokers?
No, what is referred to as labor brokers is discussed under atypical employment, which is theme 1.
And you say that there's been an agreement on that?
There isn't agreement on the themes that have been negotiated, Kolani. There still remains large areas of disagreements between the social partners.
Okay, take us through these disagreements then.
Okay, I think the most important to note is the disagreements among the issue of labor brokering, for an example, as part of atypical employment. Government has proposed some measures, and the business is saying we need to regulate the management, or rather the process or the system around labor brokering, whereas labor is saying we need a total ban on labor brokering. And there's also areas around collective bargaining in relation to the violence during strikes. That is still an area where there's some areas of disagreements. So indeed the process of negotiation is concluded, but there isn't agreement on many of the areas that have been negotiated.
All right, so Labour says ban labor brokers, says the unions. Government says legislate around that. What does business say?
Come again, Kolani?
What does business say about labor brokers?
Business is saying we need to regulate, we need to tighten the regulation of labor brokers. We do not think it's feasible to ban labor brokers because, we have achieved good results with labor brokering. There has been a number of employment that has been established or that has been created through labor brokers. So what we're saying is we need to regulate labor brokering and not totally ban this practice.
You talk about good results. The president, in the very same speech that I referred to, spoke about inherent abuses in the system. How then does business suggest we deal with these abuses?
Listen, Kolani, business has also been coming out clearly indicating that we do acknowledge and we do recognize that there are some handful of problematic labor brokers who disregard the law relating to employment, and therefore we're calling for tighter enforcement of the law in this regard. So business is of the view that if together with government we can work on enforcing the current legislation, then we should be able to address issues of abusive labor practices.
But what are these successes that business is referring to where labor brokers are concerned?
We're talking about over 3 million jobs that have been created through flexible labor, and over 1 million of that have been created through labor brokering. We're talking about over 30,000 learnerships that have been created last year through labor brokering, and the flexibility that this kind of practice provides to employers.
Sorry to interrupt you, because I would like some explanation on that. You say 3 million jobs created through labor brokering or by labor brokering?
I'm saying 3 million jobs have been created through flexible labor, and this includes fixed employment, contract, and labor brokering.
But you see, that's the question again, whether labor brokers are in the business of creating jobs or are in the business of filling the space that the employers don't want to pick up on. In other words, you say 3 million jobs have been created by or through?
I think it's very important, Kolani, to indicate that labor brokers create access to employment.
But they don't create employment?
Yes, they create that access to creating those jobs.
How?
They provide an opportunity for employers who require or who are looking for jobs to go through labor brokers and then get access to those employment or access to those jobs. And companies are using labor brokers to be able to make sure that they are getting the right people that are required to come and fill those posts that need to be filled urgently and for a short period of time.
So if the labor brokers were not there, would these jobs have not been created?
I think that's a question that we need to debate, and from the business we're saying we've seen positive results with the labor brokering, and we're saying we recognize that there are problems here and there, but we need to tighten the regulations, we need to tighten the enforcement, and we don't believe that banning them totally will provide the solutions that we're looking for, or banning them totally will create jobs.
All right, let's go to Tony then. We're going to go to COSATU in a minute, but Tony, your thoughts on this. Labor brokers, Are they creating jobs, or are they an enabler of job creation?
Well, I think, Zalani, they're doing both, and I'll tell you why I say that. Mm-hmm. There's certainly a proportion of jobs through labor brokers that would have been created directly via employers anyway, or regardless of there being labor brokers. So they would have been employed anyway. But, if we look anecdotally, and we use Namibia as an example, we see that when Namibia confronted this issue and attempted to, or indeed did, if you like, outlaw labor broking, we saw that not all jobs that were that arose through labor brokers were mopped up by employers themselves. So, on the one hand, labor brokers provide work for those who would, without labor brokers, have found employment anyway. But because of the flexibility that labor broking provides, it promotes employment, and you'll find that employers will employ more if they have the capacity to do so through labor brokers.
Interesting. But maybe what we need to do, Tony, is just to take a step back and say the origins of labor broking in this country. Where do you trace them? How did it happen? How did you get here?
Well, my sense of it is that as our labor laws have become increasingly regulated, employers have looked for and explored ways of being able to acquire, if you like, employment flexibility. So, for example, an employer will go through peaks and valleys of production or peaks and valleys of demand. And having a permanent labor force presents them with severe difficulties. So as labor laws increasingly become regulated, employers, as a result of that, increasingly seek more flexible ways of addressing their flexible employment requirements.
Let's bring in COSATU then. Bheki, everyone seems to argue that atypical forms of employment, including labor broking, if you will, is an increasing phenomenon around the world. It's not just a South African situation, and that labor has got to accept that that's the way things are done now in the labor market.
Look, let me just indicate that the line is a little bit faint, but it's true that in the quest of maximization of the profit, business will look to many ways of exploiting the workforce. And therefore, fundamentally, the basis of labor brokering is to exploit the workers as much as they can, on the basis that they want to not to pay what we might at present be talking about decent work, try to eliminate all forms of abuse. And of course, labor brokering is a form of abuse for the vulnerable workers. So in the context of exploiting workers, in the context of take much as you can and squeeze them, that's how the labor brokering has been working. So in an essence, it is those third party who goes to the employers and says, we can cut your cost, and the only element in terms of the cost that we can squeeze on is to exploit the labor force, because it's the weakest link that you can't exploit your machine, you can't exploit other issues, therefore goes to the working people and exploit them.
Let me ask you this, though, because a lot of people who obviously support labor brokers are saying, including, by the way, the government, they are saying that these abuses that you're talking about are limited to certain labor brokers. They are not a general feature across the board. What are your experiences as COSATU?
Look, in the beginning of this debate, Conan, if you remember, the argument that some people were putting on the labor brokering and were saying, look, we want to, and the BUSA representative hinted to it, want to provide the sectors with the skills they want, because they may not be able to know where the right people and to match with their jobs. That has been excluded in the debate in terms of the recruitment agencies. But in terms of normal labor brokering, it's a question of avoiding cost, it's a question of taking the dignity of the workers, and it's to exploit them. So we said to them, how can you be able to say you will not exploit these things on the principle that the fundamental principle of the labor brokers is to stand against the principle that says equal pay for the job of the equal value. They are refusing, even in the current debate and discussion, when they say, look, we were closer to government. Even government who support some form of labor brokering says, but the principle has to be equal pay for the job of the equal value. They are refusing.